Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest was actually introduced to me by the algorithm, as his tweets, full of super helpful and much appreciated screenwriting tips, kept showing up in my Twitter feed. And then one day I saw a tweet from him about his sobriety and thought to myself, well, this might be interesting. He graciously agreed to come on the podcast, but the whole interview nearly fell out over my own ennui. I am sorry I have been incapable of making new episodes, but I am so glad he bore with me, as his story, replete with childhood car heists, took me back to a magical time here in Hollywood in the late 90s, when he was a hot young screenwriter howling around with young Hollywood up on the Sunset Strip, and like many of us, sabotaging his own career. But he got sober, moved back to Houston, and started to rebuild. His recent work includes the movie Winchester, starring Helen Mirren, and he has crafted his own online screenwriting community with so many great resources at storyandplot.com. Won't you please welcome Tom Vaughan?
I was born in Pittsburgh. My family moved around quite a bit. My father was in oil and chemicals, and so we worked for Arco. He worked for Arco. We were out in LA as a child, moved to Philadelphia, from Philadelphia up to Connecticut, from Connecticut down to Texas. And I've been down here in Texas since I was 15 years old, and I have split my adult life between Houston and Los Angeles.
Interesting. Oh, that's wild. And wow, was that like a cultural adjustment moving to Texas when you were a teenager?
Well, I was so young. And I was a really terrible teenager. I was a very angry kid. And when we moved down here, I have three older brothers, and my relationship with some of my older brothers is not a good one. And when we moved down to Houston, it was just me and my parents.
Right.
So it was a very different experience. It's why I had a different relationship with my parents than my brothers did, is because we had spent 3 years where it was just the three of us.
Where were they? Were they in college or off?
Yeah, they were all older than me, so they
Right.
were gone. They didn't go to college. One was in the Marine Corps.
Mhm.
My brother Lance, who I'm probably closest to, is a very talented artist, and he went to go paint. Unfortunately, he writes more than he paints now. But yeah, it was just, I was
Right.
at that age, and they were all like, "We don't want to go down there.
Right.
We're here." So I came down to Texas, and that, of course, was, a turning point for my life, like any move would be.
Sure. And when did you have your first drink?
I had my first drink in Greece. So funny, because I was adamantly against alcohol or drugs or anything like that. And in Greece, there was no age limit.
Right.
So I went there on a field trip I had been expelled from school, and I had to go to a private boarding Catholic school. And
why did you get expelled from school? For just being so angry? And
yeah, I ran away from home a couple times.
How old were you at that point?
15.
So
15.
This is once you were in Houston.
No, this was right before Houston. It was
Right.
the year before Houston. I would have
Right.
stayed at that Catholic school if we hadn't moved down to Houston, because I was doing really well. I had I ran when I was 14. I took my parents' car and drove down from Connecticut down to Florida.
That's a long road trip.
And yeah, it was a good long road trip. And
Did you have a license at that point?
No, I was 14.
No, yeah. I just can't remember.
Yeah.
Like, because I got licensed pretty young, but yeah, I guess 14 is too young for any place.
Yeah.
Maybe Arkansas.
I went down there with a buddy and traveled and had fantasies of living on the street or something like that.
And how long were you gone before what happened?
Well, they noticed the next morning, but I was gone for about 2 weeks. I was gone for about 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And were the police looking for you?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a thing because it was
And were
a
your parents
relative.
wise to the fact that you had stolen the car? I mean, did they put two and two together that like you had
Yeah, well, I had stolen the car and drove down to Philadelphia by myself the year before.
when you were 13?
Yeah,
Let me ask
and
you, as a 13-year-old, did you look older than your age, or were you like a
no,
no, you were just a
no,
baby
I
driving
just
this car
yeah, and
around?
I taught myself to drive as I drove. Like I had
Wow,
never
that's
been in a car
amazing.
before,
Wow, you're crazier than I am.
and there was there were some great lessons there because I remember like as long as I was driving towards something, I was happy.
Right. Wow.
But then when I got to Philadelphia and there was nowhere else to go, I was 13, I was a child, so I was very
Yeah.
scared and lonely and ended up driving back before I got pulled over by the cops.
And did you get pulled over?
On the first trip, yeah.
Right. And what did they do? Were they like, you're a child, sir?
He's like, you're too young, even down south. I believe it's his exact words. And so they brought me in, and the cops are really, really nice to me. And they saw a bunch of bruises on me from my brother, my oldest brother,
Wow.
and they naturally assumed it was my dad.
Right.
And so when my dad and my mom came down to pick me up, they were giving him the dirtiest looks because they thought I was from an abused home, which I kind of was, just not from my dad. Uh,
This was how much older than you was your oldest brother?
6 years older was, and he's the one I don't get along with too
I
well.
could see that if you were that bruised that the police assumed you were an abusive household,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
rough. That's really
yeah.
rough.
Um, and
And did
so
they
I went.
confront your parents about the allegations of abuse, or did they just kind of was a different
No,
era?
I heard about the dirty looks from my dad later on.
And
He told me.
and God, wow, there's just so much here. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but like when at what point did your dad mention the dirty looks?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I think it was. I really don't know. I don't know if it was months or years later before he mentioned that to me.
Right, because I mean, are your parents are aware that you're getting beaten up enough by your older brother that you're
Well, I
bruised?
think they thought it was more just normal big brother stuff.
Right,
Because my
sure.
dad he had six brothers and sisters, and yeah, I think they just thought it was normal big brother stuff and not something to really worry about.
And in your mind, it was not.
In my mind, no, no. Like to me, it was because I had other big brothers that weren't an issue,
That weren't horrible to
like
you. Yeah, yeah,
so.
yeah. And
Yeah,
you
like
see
my
your
brother.
friends, they've got big brothers and they're not doing
Yeah,
the same
my
horrible
brother
shit to you.
John was typical big brother stuff of like, don't hit yourself, stop
Right,
hitting yourself, like that typical, big brother, stuff. But the other one was a little like was a little different. Yeah, it
right,
was different. So. But when I went down to Florida, we came back, and that's a whole other side story. But like the important thing for me was I got expelled from school. They were tired of me, and like they was like you gotta go. And my dad took me to this Catholic boarding school, St. Thomas More, up in Connecticut. And I was like, this is fine, like whatever, we'll
right,
just stay here. And they're like, we got other schools we can look at. It's like, this is perfectly fine. And as we drove home, my dad had to stop the car, get out, get on a payphone, and move money out of his retirement. And
right,
I heard that conversation. And in my stupid 14-year-old mind, I thought we were rich. I
right,
thought we were a wealthy family.
right,
Because my dad was raised very poor and in his mind, one of the ways he expressed love was to buy things because he
right,
didn't have that when he was a
right.
kid. And
Sure.
being 14 and not knowing the difference, you just feel like money is constant, like money is. And so when I overheard him have to move money around because I was an idiot and a jerk, like it adjusted me very, very quickly.
Right.
Oh my
Interesting.
God, what do I not understand about this world?
Right.
So when I went to this boarding school, I was determined not to waste their money, and so I ended
Right.
up
Oh,
getting
that's
straight A's and was number one in my class, and
how
so
amazing.
my parents were so delighted at the shift that when the school had a field trip to Greece, they agreed to like let me go, and so I went up and I flew to Greece.
Okay, one question before we go
Yes,
on to Greece. Where did you live in Florida for 2 weeks?
we had a buddy down there. Oh,
Oh, nice.
this is really interesting. I had forgotten about this, but we had a buddy down there, and we drove to him. And when we got there, his dad, who was a single dad, said, "Hey, look, I know what you're doing. I know you just ran away from home, and you know, here's the deal. You can call your parents right now, tell them where you are, and you can stay here for a few days and then fly back.
Right,
Or you can get in the car and keep going. One
right,
of the two. And we ran out of money. I'd spent the last 75 cents on McDonald's French fries. And so we were like, we'll do that. So we ended up calling my parents, and that's how thing. But what I
right.
didn't know at the time was because Bruce was very understanding, very into what we were doing. And I realized later on that Bruce was sober. Bruce was
Oh,
knee deep in
interesting.
AA,
Right.
and he was sober because
Huh.
all the stuff that he talked about, I heard again 20 years later.
That's amazing.
Like, and then like a light bulb went off in me in my 30s and went, oh.
Like, what kind of stuff did he say? Do you remember?
It was a lot about his life changing and how he
Right.
stopped drinking and he stopped
Oh,
sleeping
right.
around and turned his life over to a higher power. And
That's
uh,
amazing. How
yeah,
wild. I mean, how wise of him to give you guys that choice.
yeah, he was great. He changed to like another, just one of those big shifts in your life.
So anyway, so your parents are so excited they let you go to Greece. And
Yeah, so I
how's
went
that?
to Greece, and I guess I think I had turned 15 at this point, so I'm in Greece, and there was my math teacher, Mr. Quinn, and everyone else was getting sloshed, and I chose not to drink.
Right.
And Mr. Quinn, I remember him talking to me, going, "Tom, I'm really impressed that you chose not to drink while you were here. I'm really impressed. That was a really mature decision. I know what everyone else is doing." And then for whatever reason that night, I chose to get drunk and got sloshed.
Right.
And it was my first intoxication, and flew back from Greece back to the States, hungover as can be,
Right.
but was so liberated and had so much fun and this newfound confidence. It was something I really, really enjoyed. I
Yeah.
didn't realize how much I enjoyed at the time, but um, it was leaving myself for a little while, and so that was
And
very seductive.
and then did that become sort of a pattern when you got to Houston?
It did not until my
Right.
senior year in high school,
Right.
where I was basically used. I got drunk a couple times, basically to get up the courage to hit on somebody.
Right.
That was really what that was about. And I didn't start drinking really heavily until my freshman year of college,
Where'd you go to college?
University of Houston,
Right.
where I teach now.
Oh, nice. And so
Yeah.
were you in a dorm there, or were you living at home, or what was how'd that
I
go?
was in a dorm and I joined a fraternity. I joined a
Right.
fraternity, and it was an interesting fraternity because we were kind of the outcast of the Greek community at U of H, a lot of
Mhm.
philosophy majors and artists, and
Right. How
it was
interesting.
just a mismatch. And
Right.
I'm still buddies with a lot of them now, but that's when beer was plentiful. Women were, or looking back on it, girls,
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
all 18, 19.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really the first time I started drinking where it affected my life.
Right. And was it just like fraternity parties, or was it
It
like
was mostly fraternity parties, but it was also just that desire to do it all the time. It was
yeah,
like the desire
sure.
to do it constantly. It was, um, I didn't know it at the time, but I was an actor and I was acting on the side, and my freshman year of college I decided not to do it. Um, but I always thought of myself as a very confident person.
Right.
And for whatever reason in college is when um, uh, that social anxiety started to kick in. And
Mm.
looking back on it, my confidence was very, very fake
Mm.
all through high school. And then as I started to get more comfortable in my ability to kind of be in front of people, I was mistaking that performance aspect of my life for confidence. And but the drinking started to kind of help it more and more.
Right.
As far as like being social, talking to people. Years later, I wouldn't be able to do anything without drinking. Like I had to have the drink just to even be around people.
And so, did you graduate from college?
At that point, no, I dropped out. I was a 6 year sophomore when I dropped out. I was a 6 year sophomore.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Because
that's extreme.
I went back to acting, and then I started writing.
Right.
And all I wanted to do was write. All I really
Yeah.
wanted to do was drink and write.
Right.
That was like basically what I did. And um, by the time I was 22 years old, I had opened up a small theater in Houston that had a full bar in it.
Ah, cool.
And my close friends were starting to figure out that I was an alcoholic at this point. And I was in the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps Reserve. When I left high school, I joined the Marine Corps Reserve because I was going to fly jets for the Marine Corps. And I, basically drank myself to the point where I stopped showing up to the reserve drills. So I thought I would be a better officer if I had enlisted experience. That was my feeling. Both my father was enlisted and my brother was enlisted, and so my logic was, if I have time as an enlisted Marine, I will be a better officer.
Right.
And so when I graduated from high school, I got accepted into officer training for flight. And
Right.
but I also went straight to boot camp.
Wow.
So I went to boot camp. I came out freshman year, the first fresh semester, um, and was very gung ho Marine. Was going to do this, as a career.
Wow.
But by really the next year, I had kind of started to miss acting, started acting again, started
Right.
drinking heavily, started missing weekend drills, and eventually, just for on a spontaneous, for no good reason, got up and moved to New York and didn't tell anybody.
Right.
So, and looking back, I realized like that was the first real damage my drinking did, was when I stopped going to drills and stopped
And so
that
what are the
first.
consequences for that? Do
Well, they kick you out.
they just kick you out and do
Yeah, I
they
got another than honorable discharge from the Marine Corps, which
right.
to this day, of like all the things that I've done with my drinking, all the things that I'm kind of embarrassed about, the only thing that I can say I truly feel shame about is the other than honorable discharge.
Right.
Um, and it wasn't until I got sober where I recognized, because I remember I would go to drills so hungover that I would pass out.
Right.
Like they couldn't keep me awake, because between the heat and being hungover, the lack of hydration, like that and so it just got worse and worse. And
And what I'm
eventually,
just curious, like what did your drinking look like at that point? Like
at that point, it was just a shitload of
it was
beer.
just beer, right?
It's just beer. And then I would say by the time I was 22 or 23, it had switched to tequila.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how old are you when you moved to New York?
Uh, I was 20.
Right.
I was
So you went to New
20.
York first, then you came back to
Yeah, I
Houston
went to
at
New
some
York
point.
for 7 months, and I managed a movie theater on 8th Street, and then I managed a Blockbuster Video on 32nd Street.
Wow.
And I remember coming home from lunch of having a beer at lunch because I was too young and too stupid. I didn't realize like, no, you can't have a beer
Right, right.
on at lunch during one of your
When you're
shifts.
working, right.
Yeah, like you can't do it. And I was like, well, I see it in the movies all the time. They go and have the two martini
Yeah,
lunch.
yeah,
And
totally.
they're like, yeah, this isn't the 1940s anymore. And it was clear to me, that my future there was pretty limited, and I
Right.
had turned pretty aggressively to playwriting, and I wanted to come back to U of H and study with Edward Albee, who was teaching playwriting at U of H.
Wow. And were you able to do that?
Yep, yep.
Oh,
And
cool.
that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd come back and I would take 12 hours, and my parents would pay for my semester. And by the time I was done, I'd dropped down to 3 hours, and it was just the Olby class.
Right.
And so I even had to like forge report cards.
Right, right.
So my parents thought I was still taking 12 hours. They still thought I was, which is how I ended up as a 6 year sophomore, because I was
Right.
only ending up taking 3 classes a semester. And, U of H was about to kick me out anyway because my grades, and it's so like I tease my students now because I teach at U of H now, and I tease my students of like, how bad do you have to be to get an F in a class? Because that like you can just withdraw from the class, just
Yeah, yeah,
just
exactly.
withdraw. And I would be so drunk that I wouldn't even care about withdrawing. I just end up with an F.
Wow. And so what happened? So you ultimately withdraw from U of H, or you don't sign up
I
for
dropped
another?
out of school. I dropped out of school to open up this theater.
Right.
And and I was too young, too irresponsible, and too drunk
Sure.
to manage a nonprofit theater.
Sure.
I was writing well,
Right.
like we put out good productions, but the theater was doomed. Like it was just not going. I was burning bridges and pissing people off, and so eventually we ran out of money, and I I had an agent from LA read a review of one of my plays,
Uh-huh.
and so he reached out to me, and I started a relationship,
Who was
professional.
that?
Say again?
Who was it?
It was just an agent from David from CAA,
Right. Oh, no big
and
deal.
yeah. Oh, it was yeah. That's a whole other story of just like that how that happened. So CAA became my first screenwriting agency,
Right. Wow. Good place to
and
start.
it's a good place to start. And I moved out to LA.
Who was the agent? What was his
A guy
name?
named David Stein.
Oh, I know David Stein. Sure.
You know David?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he ultimately became a screenwriter.
He did. He sold a script. He's managing now, but
Is
he
he
did. He sold
managing?
the
Is he
script.
still writing?
No, he's not writing
Right.
anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Uh, yeah, that's very funny. David. So David was my first agent. He had just gotten his desk. He had just got promoted to agent, and um, I sent him an action script, and we started that relationship. And
Oh, amazing.
yeah, good guy. Um, uh, and I moved out to LA.
Hmm.
And over the next 2 years, started making pretty good money as a screenwriter.
Nice.
Uh, but
And were you selling stuff or working for assignments or both?
um, both,
Right.
both, and that was just all I got. I sold a script with Matthew McConaughey attached, and that kind of like boosted my
What was that
profile
script?
a
It's so
little
funny.
bit.
I was in development then. Like, what was that script called?
It's a script called The Road Home. We sold it to Warner Brothers,
Huh, I don't remember it, but
and and I was again too drunk, too irresponsible, too much time, like I for making too much money and not having to wake up in the morning. It was just a
Yeah,
bad,
yeah.
bad combination. And I can still imagine, I still remember that apartment of where I
Where was
was.
it?
I was up on Beechwood right next to Beechwood and Franklin.
I mean, literally,
So,
my house is on Canyon Drive. Like,
okay.
but I'm just like behind. I'm in that like little craftsman-y neighborhood behind Gelson's, or what it was, the Mayfair back then. But
Yeah, same neighborhood. So
hilarious.
Birds was my drinking place.
Birds is still going strong. I walk by
Still
there.
going
I
strong.
smell the place. I'm like, why? Why does anyone eat here? I don't understand. But yeah, amazing,
So yeah, Birds, La Poubelle. That was all my neighborhood in the 90s.
amazing.
Yeah, and Birds was my preferred place. I liked it because I only had to take two right turns to get
Right.
home. So uh and just for the next 6 years was just drinking up a storm. I got connected into young Hollywood because of a director friend I knew, got a movie, and he introduced me to kind of the younger my age Hollywood stars, and started to run around with that pack a little bit. And um, we had one of us who was really, really hot at the time. And she was able to just get us into anywhere. Like she knew everybody. And
I can delete this if it makes you uncomfortable, but just out of curiosity, who was that?
Tara Reid.
Tara Reid. So okay, so I was an executive on Urban Legend 2, which Tara Reid,
Oh,
was one of the leads in. So funny. Wow.
that's so funny. Well, the director buddy of mine was Jamie Blanks.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, Jamie did the first. Oh, he did the first movie.
Yeah,
No fucking
that's
way.
how I knew Tara, was through Jamie on Urban Legend.
That's right. Fuck, no way. I mean, we
Yeah,
must have come across each other.
we may
Who it
have.
was,
Were you
and
at
Jared. It was like
Phoenix?
Jared Leto and
Yeah, Urban Legend was Jared Leto, Alicia Witt.
Alicia Witt. I've seen Alicia recently.
Yeah. Were you at Phoenix?
I was at Phoenix.
That's amazing.
I mean, the exec who brought that in was Nick Osborne. I mean, I don't know if you remember, if you knew
I don't
Nick.
remember
He was
Nick.
a Scottish guy, tall Scottish guy, and like it was really more his. The first movie was really his project. The second movie was more my project, even though whatever, I was sort of a more senior exec at that point. But it was like Phoenix.
Sure.
Mike ran it kind of like it was a bit like the Octagon. Like whoever could get anything done, they were free to get it
Yeah.
done. So which was kind of great and kind of frustrating too.
Were
Uh,
you? I had the worst meeting I've ever been in Hollywood with Mike Medavoy. Uh, and it was a director brought me in on the project, and I was not expensive enough for Mike.
what was the
And
project?
it was a pirate movie,
Uh-huh.
and it was the director of Con Air, who I can't remember his name.
Yeah. Uh, Con Air was Scott Rosenberg wrote it, right?
Rosenberg wrote it, and then I'm just going to drive me crazy until I figure it out.
It
And so
wasn't
what it was this guy was developing a pirate movie,
at
and
Phoenix.
not
No,
yet.
he was
And
trying to sell it.
and he was hot. This is right after Con Air.
Right.
So he was hot as can be. And then Phoenix was Simon West.
Simon West, sure.
And Phoenix was developing a pirate movie. And so they said, let's combine our
I
projects.
remember our pirate movie.
Let's combine our projects. And so it was a modern day pirate film. So Simon West said, okay, this is my writer. This is who I want to do it. But I wasn't expensive enough. Mike wanted an A-list. He wanted Scott
Right.
Rosenberg. He wanted something
Right.
like that. And so Mike just fucking ambushed me in that meeting and like interrupted me every few seconds in the pitch. It was like, I don't buy that. What's going on with that? I don't buy that. It was awful.
Wow.
And then even though Simon West and I had developed this pitch together, you could
Right.
see Simon just bail, just go,
Right.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I was so furious. And they paid me, good money for that one pitch,
Right. Right.
Because
That's good, right? It's kind of
but
a win.
like they were like, we're going to go with our own guy, but here's like 75 grand or
Yeah.
something for
To
all
go
your
away.
ideas to go away. But it was It was it was such a weird, and Jamie, who's like Jamie and I are trying to make another movie together right now.
Right now,
Yeah.
it's so fun.
And
I mean, Jamie was represented by Simon Millar.
yeah,
Anyway, that
it's his
was
manager. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
And I don't know what,
Jamie's such a sweetheart. I mean, he was
yeah,
just the sweetest guy.
still
And
is.
we would laugh. There was one point I remember looking at, we were trying to cast the film, and we're sitting in the movie, we're sitting in a meeting after the whatever, we've had some casting session, and Jamie's going through his notes, and he has the nicest notes about everyone. And so you're like, well, Jamie, you loved her, and he's like, no, I didn't, not really, not really. But even in the moment, he had written something nice about it. It's so sweet. Like, so she's your first choice? No, I didn't really like her.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're both still that way. We were going through a casting discussion like last week, and because we had reconnected like 2 years ago, we hadn't
right.
talked in a long time, and and we're both like, oh, they'd be great. Like every single person. What about this person? Oh, they'd really be wonderful. They'd be fantastic. Because we just like we're not going to say anything negative of like, oh,
Right.
there's
Totally.
that is wild. I'll
What a
have to mention.
weird intersection.
Yeah. Yeah,
Anyway,
Jamie and I reconnected a couple years ago. We've been chatting, and then it was like, let's fucking.
let's do
We've
something.
been
Yeah.
trying to find something for so long, and he had been out of directing for a while because he wanted to raise his kid.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, but Jamie was I got introduced to Jamie through Don Murphy.
Yeah, I
Don
remember Don.
Murphy,
Sure.
yeah, Don loved a script of mine and showed it to Jamie. And
Mm-hmm.
then Jamie loved it. And so Jamie and I met. We met at Birds. We went and we
Right.
had a bunch
Amazing.
of beer at Birds. And then a few months later, like he called me up saying, "Hey, I just got this urban legend gig." And so he was in town, we went to go visit, and then he introduced me to Tara, and then Tara's brother Tommy, who's still a buddy of mine,
Mm-hmm.
was trying to produce this movie called The Irishman, who Matthew McConaughey was perfect for.
Right.
And so like Tommy was like I got to talk to this guy
Yeah.
Tom.
Sure.
And so that kind of brought me into because Tara at the time was hot as can be.
Oh
Like,
yeah, and that was like a great like time for young Hollywood at that point. It just seemed
yeah,
like all those clubs up on Sunset, and you go up there,
yeah,
you kind of see everyone you
Atlantic,
knew. You just like
yeah,
run into people that you were making movies with. It was
yep.
cool.
And so we just followed Tara inside because we didn't have to
Right.
wait in any lines or anything. Tara would show up, the bouncer would be like, "Here you go," and she'd be like, "He's
Yeah,
with me, he's with me." And so, and of course, just drinking up a fucking storm. Uh, and to this day, like all those times that I drove home,
right.
how did I not kill somebody?
Right.
How the hell did I not
Yeah,
kill somebody?
sure.
I had this narrow turn into my parking spot in my uh, Beechwood apartment, and I scratched the hell out of that car, always kind of missing that turn. It's just like like all the time. And for the life of me, I remember coming home one time from a party in Beverly Hills, and uh, I I cannot imagine how I drove home because that
Yeah.
wasn't around the corner. That was from Beverly Hills into Hollywood
Yeah. No, I remember.
through through West Hollywood, like
Yeah.
people walking around in West Hollywood.
Yeah. No, I'm
Oh,
with you, man. It's a miracle that,
it's a miracle. It's an absolute miracle. Um,
And so what
yeah.
happened? Like, so ultimately,
Well, like that's is I was so insecure. I was so scared. I was so convinced if I wasn't successful that I would not be worth loving. Like
mhm,
that was like the subtext of so much of
sure.
my life of like I have to be successful and um looking for anything just what's going to make me feel different about me.
Yeah.
And so started doing more drugs, started trying to do that. And eventually I tried to do another play. that I self-financed at what is now the UCB Theater.
Sure. The
Used
Tamarind
to be
back
the
then.
Tamarind Theater. Yeah, I did a production there, and my drinking had gotten so heavy. I was drinking before rehearsals. I was directing. I'd written and directed. I was drinking before rehearsals, and the cast was just, and they were all friends of mine.
Yeah.
One of them was the sister of one of my best friends, um, and it just got worse and worse. And I had one night where it had become me versus the cast.
Right.
I don't know how. I had plenty of friends going, dude, they're being really unreasonable. They're being unreasonable. And so that would make me feel like, okay, I'm in the right. I'm in the right.
Right.
And really, I don't know anything looking back other than I was drunk off my ass and I
Right.
was belligerent and mean.
Right.
And um, so I had invited enough of my LA contacts out to this thing to come see this play. And I bottomed out. I had one night, opening night, where um, my doctor started giving me, Jesus, this is so much. I didn't even talk about the pancreatitis. Like this is, I had 4 bouts of pancreatitis from
Wow.
my drinking. And
Yeah.
by the time I had my fourth pancreatitis, I was drinking before the pancreatitis was gone. So, I mean, like it had gotten really bad. And I bottomed out. And the next morning, like I got into a fight. I got pushed down. It had gotten physical. And the next morning, I got a call from my writing partner and my best friend, Christy. And she said, "Hey, look, we can't be friends anymore. We're
Right.
done. We're done. I grew up with this shit because her dad was an alcoholic. So
Right.
I grew up with this shit, and I don't need this in my life anymore." And of course, in that moment, you're just defensive and you're like, you don't know what happened, and like, and all
Right.
that
Right.
shit. But I had been bottoming out. I had been blacking out. I like it. It had gotten really, really bad. Like start getting into the details, and uh, and for some reason, having someone that you genuinely cared about, that you really loved, and that you wanted in your life, saying, absolutely not, no more. Like,
Right.
we're done. That woke me up. And it didn't wake me up in the most healthy way, because like
Right.
that was going to be about a year later.
Mm-hmm.
But it did get my attention.
Right.
And I had started to kind of put two and two together. I've just humiliated myself, feeling nothing but shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a history now of about 2 or 3 years of blacking out. I've
Right.
got this thing that's out in public, this play that I've invited influential people to,
Sure.
that's out there. And my pancreatitis, there was just so much fucking evidence
Right. Sure.
that you're probably an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up calling one of my old drinking buddies who got sober.
Mm-hmm.
I called my friend Katya and I said, okay, I think I'm ready to go to a meeting.
And was Katya in LA?
Yeah, she was in
Right.
LA.
Right.
And I said,
What
can you
year
come?
is this now?
This is 2000,
Right.
2000.
Right.
This is 2000. And and I said, can you come pick me up? She's like, no, I'm not going to come pick you up, but I will meet you there.
Right.
So here's the address, go there, I'll meet you there. And I had been planning on moving back to Houston at some point. And so I decided I'm just going to do that now.
Instead of
So
going to the meeting.
no, I went to the meeting, but like 2 days, later, and this was 2 days later, I flew back to Houston.
Where was the meeting? Just out of curiosity.
somewhere there in Hollywood
Right.
on somewhere um not quite East Hollywood.
Right. Um,
And
and how was it? What did it feel? Did it connect to you or no?
it did a little bit. It did a little bit. I bawled at some
Right.
point where I just broke down in tears crying because it
Mhm.
felt like such a little bit of liberty.
Right.
There was I remember this feeling very well being on my couch of oh, I don't have to fucking pretend anymore.
Yeah.
There's just something
What a
there's
relief.
just some yeah, there was just this sense of relief of I don't have to pretend that I'm not a drunk. I don't have to pretend that I know what I'm doing. I don't have to pretend I'm in control of all this shit. I don't have to pretend I'm confident. I don't have to
Right.
pretend I like myself. I don't have to, like so many things of just like it was just relief.
And so
And
you fly to Houston?
I flew to Houston on election night 2000,
Right.
and I got a big book when I was in that meeting, and I sat and I called another one of my close friends, Amy, and said, "Hey, can you pick me up at the airport? I'm coming home." And so she picked me up at the airport, and I was making pretty good money, so I had her drop me off at a hotel.
Right.
And I sat there on election night and read the big book. Um, and then I did not have a car in because I was in Houston, and I took a taxi from downtown Houston to go see my parents. And this taxi driver, um, real interesting guy, had lost his arm um, on a longshoreman job.
Wow.
So, but I remember, and I don't remember if I ever said, but he'd sensed something was up with me,
Right.
and we had a talk. And there was definitely that sense of like, oh wow, this is very interesting that the universe gave me this guy to 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 drive this 45-minute drive to go see my parents. Because he had been through a lot. He never said it that I can remember. I got the sense he was sober.
Right.
Um, but I remember leaving that taxi feeling like that was an odd coincidence
Right.
that this is the guy I spent 45 minutes with and talked with when I went up to see my parents. So I ended up in the suburbs of Houston for 6 months and was going to meetings twice a day.
Wow.
And I was still writing up there. I had to move things around. I remember making phone calls telling people don't go to the play. It's not,
Right.
I knew it was not a great play. I was too drunk directing it and everything. Um, and then something happened. There's a couple things that really I thought were interesting when I first got sober. Of I see this a lot now, and I didn't recognize it at a time. I was in a meeting and I was probably maybe like 6 or 7 weeks sober at that point. And I was in a meeting and I realized my primary motivation for getting sober. And it clicked with me. And I'm like, oh shit, I did not realize this. But my sobriety was designed as a shield. It was designed of, hey, you can't hate me. I'm an alcoholic and I'm doing something.
Right. Right.
You have to
Interesting.
forgive me.
Right.
I'm helpless. This is a disease and
Right.
I am helpless. And
Huh.
if you hold this against me, you're the jerk.
Yeah.
And,
I think a lot of people use it that way now that you
oh
mention it.
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Um and of course I didn't realize it. Like it
Wow.
wasn't until that moment when I went, oh, I see the way I've been behaving of, oh, I am using this not as a way to take responsibility,
Right.
but to avoid responsibility.
Wow, that's amazing.
Um, and that shifted kind of, and I started to kind of realize like just how many games we play with ourselves through this whole thing, how many stories we tell ourselves, and which stories we choose to believe, and which ones. Um, and so about 6 months sober, I tried drinking again.
Uh-huh.
I tried drinking again, and I would take a shot and then run home and go, see, I can do it. I can take a
Right.
shot and not stay at the bar and get drunk. But within a week, I was fucking trashed again. So,
Right.
and then that led me to um, kind of realize and just to fucking accept that I am not good at taking a drink and having any guarantee of what my behavior is going to be. And I know I can take a drink and if I really put effort into it, only have one drink. But I also know at some point there's no guarantee at all what I'm going to do. And there's just no like and so I can't ever take that one drink.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do feel like I've had some friends who've gotten sober and they've called me at some point along the way to be like, yeah, but I mean, there's so many times I can drink responsibly. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the thing. You just don't know, That
Yeah,
was my thing. There were nights I was fine, but there were nights where for no reason I could understand where I drank a half a bottle of scotch.
yeah,
It's a Tuesday night, and I don't know
yeah,
why it's a half bottle tonight, but it's the way it worked out.
yeah. I have no guarantee of my behavior.
And so, did you stay in Houston after that, or did you
I
come
did.
back?
I stayed in Houston and I I kind of had, which I think is somewhat typical of like a newfound arrogance with my drinking. Because I felt like, oh man, if I was doing as well as I was while an addict,
Right,
imagine, imagine what I can do sober.
for sure. That was one of the
And
reasons I got sober was to unlock my superpowers.
yeah, yeah. And also this new conviction that I am righteous,
Right,
that I am trying to do the next right thing. And
sure,
I am trying to do what's best for my community. And I am doing this for other people, not for myself. And yes, we may be celebrating my genius during this, but it's really just for the benefit of others. Like
right.
I went through that phase for about 6 years. Um, and found had similar results of like, oh, this isn't working. Like this is
Yeah,
not me finding a way to disguise my insecurity, my inability to think of others. Like it is again like the games we play with ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves. That I was convinced that I was really just trying to do everything for other people. And it was just another way to celebrate myself. It was just another way to feel different about myself than I was feeling. And I think a lot of people, at least from my experience, is they equate drinking for the moments when you're drunk, of like that's when you behave poorly when you're drunk. And my experience was that the drinking is always a symptom of something else.
sure,
It is always a symptom of some other form of thinking, and that my decision making was poor whether I was drunk or not. It was certainly more poor when I was drinking. Like there's no doubt about that. But I was still very much in the whirlwind, whether I was intoxicated in that moment or not. And the drinking was a result of that whirlwind. Like that's what made me feel better about myself because of that whirlwind. And so even when I got sober, I still had to unlearn this way of living and these coping mechanisms that I had developed over so many years of like how I handle relationships and how I handle people and how I handle business and my laziness and my insecurity and all these coping mechanisms. And drinking was one of them.
sure.
And it was only one of them. And this was if I ever had a huge problem with some of my fellow sober friends, it is the running idea that just not drinking is the reward. Um, And I do believe it is the requirement. Like you have to stop drinking. You can't do anything until you stop drinking. If you're an addict, I've got
Yeah.
plenty of friends who can drink in a healthy way. If you are an addict, you have to stop the addiction. But that is the prerequisite for the real reward. And the real reward is finding healthier coping mechanisms than all the thing that brought the drinking, and to finally be comfortable in your own skin. Like that's the reward.
How long have you been sober now?
I think 22 years last November.
And
22 years.
how did you end up teaching at your alma mater?
Well, uh, when my career kind of plummeted, which like around 2005, my career was pretty much shot.
And do you feel what was the consequence of why? I mean, in what way? Why do you think? Do you have
Well, I
any
just
insight?
burned too many bridges.
Right.
I had just burned too many bridges, and I don't think I got even a little more arrogant after I got sober
Right.
because I hadn't learned how to live sober.
Right.
Like
Right.
I hadn't really changed who I was. I thought I did because I wasn't drinking anymore.
Yeah, sure.
But I still had this laziness. I still had this arrogance. I still had this insecurity, um, which I always find like such an interesting combination that most drunks have is that
Laziness, arrogance, and
and
insecurity. It's so
insecurity.
brutal.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
brutal combo.
Terrible combination. And my career had plummeted and left. And so I was like, well, let me go back to school. Let me get my degree. And I went back full time, worked at the Apple store to work my way through college. And I think at 36 or 37, finally got my bachelor degree in political science. And then five years later, got my MFA in screenwriting.
Wow.
And the MFA in screenwriting was very interesting because I had a better resume than any of my
Then your
teachers.
teachers, yeah, sure.
Yeah. But I wanted it because I knew I eventually I wanted to teach at U of H. I love this school. I love being here. And luckily for me, my career kind of came back. And I embraced it and treat it very, very differently than I used to. And
What's some of the stuff you've been working on in Hollywood in
well, I
recent?
had a film a few years ago with Helen Mirren called Winchester.
Uh-huh. Great.
I had a
Wow, I remember that.
film come out last October, which was a real disappointment creatively, but that was the Haunting of the Queen Mary.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and then ideally, if everything works out, I'll have a film in production this fall, and then hopefully this movie with Jamie and I will go forward as well. And you know,
Um, that's amazing. I mean, it's really so funny. Like I had really just discovered you on Twitter somehow. And I think just whatever, I look at some of the screenwriting stuff on Twitter, and you've got like great stuff that you're sharing there. And I guess do you teach some online courses or
yeah,
like
yeah. The Twitter stuff is meant to kind of promote the online courses that I teach,
right.
and so I teach these classes. I film them, and then they're recorded or pre-recorded, and you can take these screenwriting classes. And then if you can't afford the classes, we do a lot of free stuff just on Twitter and the weekly
No,
email and free
super,
lessons and
super helpful. And it's what's it called? The online
storyandplot.com.
um I'm just sort of I have a couple of two things I'm sort of curious about. One was just like the metal it must have taken to show up at the Apple store after having had such a glamorous run in Hollywood. Um, what was that like?
Uh, well, one, I remember being amazed that there was money in my bank account every 2 weeks.
Right.
I tried to,
A paycheck, my God, how
I was trying to
wonderful.
explain to them of like, you don't understand this magic. Like every 2 weeks, you just show up, and every 2 weeks you get more. Like they put money in your account.
Right.
It's amazing to me. There was a part of me that was nervous about running into someone I knew,
Right.
and of like, well, what happened to you, dude?
Yeah. How'd you end up
How
here?
did this happen? Like
Right.
what? But there was also a part of me that, like, well, this is what I'm doing, and
This is
I'm
where I'm
working.
at.
This is where I'm at. I'm going to school, and there's nothing ever wrong with a hard, honest day's work.
Right.
And also was lucky because I enjoyed the people there.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good vibe.
There's a good vibe. They were younger. This was 2006, and so Apple stores are relatively new.
Right.
Steve Jobs is still around, and there was just this atmosphere of we love this product. Like I was there for the iPhone launch,
Right.
and how exciting that was, and how much we all loved Apple. Um, and it really started my run of hanging out with people younger than me, which I think has really been very healthy and kept me young. And I was back in school at the time, and I was working at the Apple store, and I was almost always the oldest one in the room.
Right.
And then when I went back to LA, I started doing improv again
Where?
at UCB, and through their classes, and that was my creative community from like 2012 to 2017.
You moved back to LA for 5 years.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah.
Is that
And
before you started teaching at U of H?
yes,
Right.
yeah. Um, and and then all of a sudden I was taking classes with people that were 10, 15 years younger than me. But I really enjoyed it, and they were very welcoming, and there was a little bit of Hollywoodish type stuff of like um, where people would treat you like the weird old guy,
Oh, for sure. I've been that guy, believe me.
and then they find out you're a working screenwriter,
Yeah, yeah.
and then they start treating you really well. But for the most part, and some of my best friends in LA are improvisers in LA. I love that community, and
By the time you came back to LA, had you completed your MFA?
no, I was doing it while I was there. Like when I was writing Winchester as an assignment,
Right.
and I was using that as my adaptation credit in class. So I had to adapt something in an adaptation class,
And you were
and
actually getting paid
and I was
like
using my
a
writing
bunch of money.
assignment to
That's
do it.
amazing.
Yeah.
And you did the MFA at U of H?
At a place called National University, which is kind
Right.
of a diploma mill.
Right. Sure. And then at some point, U of H had an opening and you applied for it or moved back. Is that
Yeah,
what brought you back to Houston?
I was teaching a specialized class here, and
Uh-huh.
then the regular screenwriting classes opened up, and so I didn't want someone else to grab them, because like once someone grabs a class at a
Yeah, they'll
school,
have
it's
it
very,
for
like
20
they'll have it
years.
forever.
Yeah.
And so like I can't really afford to do it right now. It just takes up too much time, and it's not it's volunteer pay. Like
Right.
it's
Right.
but I just don't want anyone else to do it.
Right.
Like so I'm doing it, and then we'll figure out what the long term. I think ideally what I would like is to either create a writing program, a screenwriting program here at U of H, or just have this one class I teach until I retire, because I just really love being here.
And what prompted you to move back to Houston?
My father died.
Right.
My father died, and I moved back and moved in with my mom for about 8 months to kind of help her through that transition.
Right.
Then I got married to a Houston girl,
Hmm.
and so I stayed here. Just flew back a lot, and then I knew I wasn't going to go anywhere until my mom passed, and then she passed about a month ago,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah,
so
that's right. I
yeah.
remember hearing
So
that.
now I'm like, I don't have to be in Houston anymore. I
Right.
love it here, but I don't have to be here anymore.
Come back to Beechwood, man. The bourgeois pig is gone, but there's other
Oh
stuff.
no. I still have dreams of that Beechwood apartment all the time. All the time. I left my cat there or something. Like I didn't feed the cat. there's always anxiety dreams about that Beechwood apartment. I'm wondering if the universe is trying to get me to move back into that apartment and heal
Dude,
like those
why do
years.
you think we ended up on this call if not for that sole single purpose? I one other question. Have you made sense of the fact that like you had an older sibling in your house who was beating the shit out of you?
Not really. I mean I I feel like there's a lot there's a lot to it, and it's tough to speak about because it's, it's family, and other, like like I'm very close to his daughter, and she feels very similarly than I do. So it is interesting now. I'm going to probably try to make more sense of it now that my parents are gone, and I have a little more freedom of how, like, hey, how do I feel about this, and what do I want to do about it, and what is
Right.
the healthiest thing for me?
I mean, I guess the question behind the question is like, do you feel that it was a cause for your drinking on some level? Like internalizing this like whatever this contempt, whatever these like negative feelings, like to do I deserve this beating? Like, is this
Yeah,
like
yeah.
who I am?
I never got that sense, but I do think, and this was something I did with my sponsor, Gene, when I got sober. And it was really looking back because I'm very curious about the idea of trauma. Because I think for the most part we make too much of it, even though
Right.
like trauma clearly exists.
Sure.
But I think we've expanded that definition quite a bit to cover more things than it should. But I do think that we have events that don't so much traumatize us, but create habits,
Right. Yeah.
create coping
Sure.
mechanisms. And we forget why those coping mechanisms ever existed. Like we forget about, well, this is when this started. This is like when you got into this habit. This is how you started to believe who you were. And long after you forget this thing happened,
Yeah.
the ripple effects are there. And I think for me, a huge one was when I was in third grade. Um, I We had just moved to Philadelphia, and this kid Tom asked me who I had a crush on. Who do you like? That was like the phrase you've used in third
Right.
grade. So this was like it couldn't have been more than like 1977 or 78 or something like that. And I had a crush on the girl that he was dating in third grade. Like, because like we get the phrase going out. Will you go
Yeah,
out with
yeah.
me? And you're like,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I just picked a random girl and
Right.
I go, oh, Adrian over there. And then the next day, Adrian and a friend ran up to me on the soccer field and pointed at me and started laughing and then ran away.
Right.
And that created this sense of shame and sense of embarrassment and insecurity about girls.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
And it continued on of
Sure.
having this fear of my, like, those relationships and fear of rejection. And that continued up until probably my senior year of high school.
Right. It's
But
funny
even
how
in my senior
those
year of high school, I was
small
still
things stay with
compensating.
you. Right.
It was all compensation. And I had totally forgotten about it. Like I'd
Yeah.
never had any idea that. And then at some point with Gene, I was like, oh shit. Because he kept going further back, further back, further back. Um, so I think that as much as everything else with my brother and that sense of being unsafe, because that
Yeah.
was a lot of my brother. Like my mom would leave the house, and then me and my brother Lance, my other younger brother, like who's the next oldest to me, suddenly we're now unsafe.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
knew we were now unsafe,
Yeah.
and like how that and I have social anxiety, which I didn't realize until my 40s.
Right.
Which of course, why would you when you're drinking that much? And then you're on because like I was self-medicating all those years
Yeah.
from that social anxiety, and that social anxiety was all that feeling of being unsafe always feeling unsafe, always feeling someone's out to get you, like there's shame involved, just that sense of embarrassment all the time. People are talking about you, just really nonsensical stuff that intellectually is ridiculous.
Right.
And yet in the back of your mind, there's just those reverberations of just like, you're not safe right now. You're not safe.
Well, Tom, this has been great. I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen. What a strange sort of crossroads, like how many rooms we must have been in at the same time at one time or another. Maybe none, but I don't know that we'll ever know.
I am sure we shook hands at some point over Phoenix.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.